Hello and welcome to Ideagen TV, powered by Azure and presented globally by Microsoft. Today we are thrilled to welcome, as part of the Empowering Women and Girls Summit, Robert Reiss, founder and CEO of the CEO Forum Group, as he's leading up an incredible power panel on the importance of women on corporate boards. Robert, welcome.
Hi everyone, I'm Robert Reiss, and thank you to Ideagen. I really have to say I'm so excited to be here. Last time I was with Ideagen was at the United Nations, and my mom, we celebrated her 85th anniversary there, and she'd actually never even seen me speak. So it was really exciting. But I think that also the audience is unique that Ideagen brings on this, on the fifth issue that we're working on. So, which is really gender parity. So we have two tremendous people in our panel, and we're going to talk about the importance of women on corporate boards. So first, let's welcome Michele. Hi, this is Michele Hooper, and she is the CEO and founder of the Directors Council, which is a really powerful, important organization. But she's also been on boards like Target, Seagram's Corporation. And why don't you just start first telling us about boards, why, in your experience, this is important?
Well, if you think about, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel. I enjoy sharing my experiences with others. I really appreciate being able to talk a particular topic because on boards has been focus of mine for my 30 years on boards. I think being on a board is important. Boards are the lifeblood, quite frankly, of our governance structure. Boards play an important role both within the organization, but also in its linkage to the external world, to those who fund it, those other stakeholders that are important to it. And quite frankly, directors have a role and are responsible in every step of the way within corporations. So it's an important job. It's a job that I don't think there are enough women and other minority groups are being a part of it. And there's a voice that's needed in that room. So having this type of conversation and having us talk about how you can get on a board, why it's important, what can you do, how does it link into the experiences that you have, I just think it's a really important job. And I think, again, I appreciate the fact that AARP and Ideagen is sponsoring this important topic.
Well, we're going to hear a lot from you on this, Michele. Let's go now and welcome Libby Sartain. And Libby, it's interesting because with AARP, obviously you're a board member, and Joanne Jenkins, one of the greatest people and leaders, visionaries in the world. And but also you've been the former CHRO of both Southwest and of Yahoo, both while they were one of the 100 best companies to work for. So talk a little bit about your background and why boards are so integral to who you are.
Of course, and thank you for having me. When I first was contemplating a career in human resources, it wasn't even called human resources, then it was called personnel administration. It never dawned on me that I would ever serve on a board of directors. In fact, at that time, every board I knew about was the good old boys club. But as my career progressed and I entered the C-suite, I realized we need more women on boards. And then I realized many of my peers were joining corporate boards. So I began to think about that and was very lucky because I started working on boards in the nonprofit arena, and that gave me some experience. And then I joined a small company board, which was Pete's Coffee and Tea. And then over time, I ended up with even large public boards like Manpower Group. And I find that having more than two women on the board really gives you a voice, critical mass, and it changes the conversation. We talk more about talent. We talk more about culture. We talk more about how does this affect our people, our customers, and our stakeholders. And I really enjoy being on the board, being part of the team, but also making a difference by being in the boardroom.
So let's talk, Michele. You mentioned something. You said there are not enough women and definitely not enough people of diversity. This is, to me, one of the most significant issues in interviewing CEOs every day. I mean, I was just interviewing Mary Barra of General Motors, and she was saying how they got to 54% women. Now, but that's a rarity. It's not yet happening. We're moving in that direction. Why is it so essential, where it's not just the right thing to do, but it's the really smart thing to do, to have more diversity and women on boards?
It all comes down to the notion of what the conversation is like in the boardroom. I had mentioned I've been on boards for 30 years. And part of the opportunity, I've been on global boards, I've been on boards in many, many different industries, and they all have the same issue, which is one of the conversation that we have, those 9 to 12 people around the table, around the issues of our company's strategy, our company's culture, our long-term sustainability, our impact on the communities in which we serve. And if you don't have enough different voices with different perspectives, then you miss out on a lot. And I have found that as we bring additional voices, women, people of color, African Americans, Hispanic, into the room, they bring their lived experience with them. And because of that, you get perspectives that we wouldn't necessarily have if we had a more homogeneous voice, which quite frankly, we have traditionally had in the boardroom. I'll give you an example of that. I served on a board that will remain nameless that had a product that was going into the Hispanic market, or into a part of the country that had a Hispanic market that was very much an opportunity for this organization to be a part of and to use its services. But we approached it because we didn't have Hispanics in our boardroom. We didn't have Hispanics in the management team. We approached it in a way that did not allow us to attack that particular market in a way that got us any productivity at all. It wasn't until we added that Hispanic voice into the management team, added a Hispanic into the boardroom, our conversations changed, our impact and our perspectives of what would cause us to be successful changed. And it began to give the organization sort of this aha moment about the value of having that diversity in the boardroom, in the company.
What a great story. And it's so true that at the heart of everything is involvement and new ideas. Otherwise, you can't succeed. So Libby, your take. You were one of the earlier. There were so few women, and I hate to hear where people say, "Oh, 2 women on boards." I mean, it should be about 50%. So, what's your take?
Well, I think that by the very nature of the fact that the organizations whose board I joined, they were actually looking for someone with a human resources background, someone who could focus on culture and on the employee experience and the customer experience and how they mapped up. So you might say I joined very enlightened boards who were sort of ahead of the game. So I kind of had an advantage as I wasn't the first female board member on any of the boards I joined. But I noticed that once we got beyond 2 or 3 female board members, once we got more diversity into the boards I served, there was much more likelihood that the board would challenge the status quo. And I think that's very healthy. Some long-held beliefs that everybody sort of had bought into, or those sacred cows, were more openly discussed, more brought to the forefront, and either agreed upon, yes, this is right, or questioned and thought about changing. So that, I think, is very important. And I think the focus on the issues that our stakeholders are interested in, the S part of ESG, has really pushed that conversation forward, and the diversity on the boards is helping the discussion happen.
There you have it. And that's starting. Now, here's something I think would be really helpful to all of our audience. If you could just give a few sentences each on what the real role of a board member is so they could consider, then we'll talk how you get on a board. But this is really at the heart of all of governance. So who wants to go first? How about Libby? We go back with you.
Well, the board has more than one role. I think the most important role that we have is to make sure that we have the right CEO in place, the right management of the company, and to oversee that process, which is an ongoing process of succession planning. But beyond that, the role has broadened so much in the last few years because investors, stakeholders, everyone are interested in our environmental, our social, and our governance issues. So we're really looking at the effect that we have, not just on customers, not just on investors, not just on employees, but on everyone we touch inside and outside the company. So it's our role to kind of put ourselves in the perspective of all of those stakeholders and ask, what are they interested in, and are we looking out after their best interests?
And Michele, want to ask you, because you also have a perspective, and I think you have a passion about this. This has become a major part of your life, but you were involved deeply in audit, and you were driving a lot. Talk about more of the role of the board, why it's so integral in driving an organization forward successfully.
Yeah, look, I agree with what Libby said, but I see the role of the board broader. I see the role of the board as being a long-term fiduciary and responsible for the long-term sustainability of the company. And what that means is that we are responsible for putting the needs of the organization before our own. That's what it means by being a fiduciary. We are responsible for the corporation and its progress in the long run, not the short run, in the long run. In fact, through our decision making. And in doing that, it means we are responsible. While Libby has an experience as a HR executive, I have an experience as a finance and strategy wheelhouse, so to speak. We are responsible for the full realm of issues that affect our corporations. And that means the hiring, the firing, the evaluation of who runs the company. And in who runs the company, you really set the culture of the firm, because the CEO leads that cultural dimension. And by who we as a board hire to sit in that seat, we are in effect setting the role and the culture of that corporation. We're responsible for the strategy, both short-term budgets and long-term budgets. We're responsible for the talent. We're responsible, quite frankly, for the diversity of the organization, both within the boardroom as well as in the management team and other levels within the organization, by the policies and philosophies that we set. We're responsible for compensation. We're responsible for not only ESG, but we are responsible for everything that goes within the company through the decisions that we make. I do indeed chair audit committees, and I've chaired audit committees for corporations over my last 25 years. I've been members of audit committees for 30 years. I've been on nominating and governance committees, policy committees, you name the committee on a board, and I've probably either been a member of it or chaired it. But as a director, as a member of the board, you have to be able to say, I may have a specialty area, but I have to understand, have an interest in all aspects of what is going on in the company. And I have to be willing to provide the time and the resources and the studying, if you will, to make sure that I understand what's going on in that company, in that industry, issues that my organization has a focus on and needs to resolve as we go through building that long-term sustainable model for our company.
Okay, so Michele, what you're really saying is that this is the driver. This is the head of strategy. It's involved in everything, the future of the organization. So could you just share in terms of it, when you say it's a time commitment, sometimes like I'm looking over there, I have this board book. These are thick that you have to read through. Just talk about, so hopefully we'll have a lot of people listening in saying, I want to join a board, because I think now is a golden opportunity. But just what is ballpark from the time commitment?
Time commitment can be as much or as little as you want from my perspective. I think a good director is probably going to spend, couple hundred hours annually on a board. You are going to be spending time understanding not only that 400 or perhaps 800. I get a 400-page audit committee book. So
you're in the audit, so you're over the top. But if you're not on the audit committee,
so but part of the issue is you have to be able to not only read the board book, but you need to be able to understand what's happening in that industry, because a lot of times you're in a company whose industry is not your basic industry. So I have served on retail boards, pharmaceutical boards, beverage boards, music company boards. My background is healthcare. And so I have had to spend hours keeping myself up to speed, getting myself up to speed.
And I want to interrupt you here, though. How exciting is it for you and fulfilling to be learning on all these different things, right? It's great.
You have to have a passion for doing it, because you spend the time. But let me also say, you have to have control of your time to the degree that you will be able to then to deal with any crises or any issues unexpectedly that may come up to you as a director. So let's take the coronavirus that hit us. On my boards, we were having phone calls once a week, sometimes more than that, as we were dealing with the issues of our organizations, taking them down, dealing with our customers. I serve on an airline board, figuring out what we were going to do. How do we manage our resources? But if I were in an organization where I did not have control of my time, I could not have fulfilled my responsibilities to my board during this period. All companies come up with crises. You have to be able to put aside your day job and deal with whatever the crisis issue is on your board.
I would agree with that. And other times that you spend quite a bit of time with the board. I've been on the board of 2 companies that have been sold. And so that can be tricky. It can be controversial. You're looking after the investors, but you're also looking after the company and wanting the best for the company. And not all the board members might not be on the same page. So I think those are the times when I have spent the most time on a board, kind of working through all those issues and making sure that the right outcome happens for everybody involved. But it is really, I think you mentioned it, and it's really important. We get paid for my boards. I get paid on the public boards. I'm also on nonprofit boards that are volunteer. But to me, the best payoff is everything you learn, keeping fresh in business. You always need to know what's going on, not just in the business world in the US, but globally. And so you got to read about your industry. You've got to read about what's happening in business. And it keeps me on my toes, I think.
Yeah, so this next question is specifically for Libby. And Libby, I think you may be one of the key people in America to answer this question, which is advice, because of your whole deep background in human resources, and which was personnel, remember those days, and boards. You're at the intersection, so a lot of people listening in. But I want to share some statistics before you give the advice. So I happen to be on the board of Women Business Collaborative, and this is a great diversity because they need men as well. So they're like, hey, we're all in it together. And one thing that I joined, because I wanted to get us to have 50 Fortune 500 women CEOs, which is actually still only 10%. But now we're moving up. We're about 43. It's still not, but it's moving. But on boards, there's bigger movement. So boards globally, it's an average about 27% women. France is probably the highest at about 44%. However, this year, there's a real change for the better, a positive change, where every month this year, the average is 42% of people joining publicly traded companies boards are women. And as a matter of fact, this last August, it was 45%, and a third are women of color. So we're definitely making progress, which is going to have a huge impact on the economy. Now, the reason I'm sharing all of this is because a lot of you listening in, your opportunity may come right now where you're ready to be on a board. But in order to do so, you have to be ready to be on the board. So, Libby, you have a unique background. Share what exact advice you have for someone to get on the board. And maybe it's a younger woman.
Yeah, right. Well, I would also say that many boards are looking for younger board members, especially tech savvy people, because digital transformation is a very big issue for many boards. But I would say that to be prepared for a board, you have to start early in your career. And I started out on the boards of art and community organizations, professional organizations. And I was fortunate enough at a pretty young age to be the chair of SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Management, 20 years ago. And all those volunteer and community things get you used to a kind of a board situation. It's not the same as a public board. And then as you move up the executive ranks, I think getting involved, not just in your profession, but getting to know what other groups in the organization are doing, meeting executives at other companies, participating, all gets you ready. And Michele and I are both active in an organization called the NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors.
Of course, Peter Gleason. Yeah.
Yes, there's a lot of courses. In fact, that's how Michele and I met. We both teach in the professionalism program, which gets people who are ready to be on a board, gets them prepared with the right content and knowledge. We even have a certification that can certify you as a director. So it's gotten much more, there's content, there's a body of knowledge, there's experience, but it's not just one way to get there. It used to just be who you know, but now it's what you know and who you know and how you get involved. I would say that most of my board appointments have come through a search firm, and only one came from a company I did some consulting work for, hired me.
How do you get there? How do you get your name so you are a potential candidate? And I know the slates are getting a lot better now, but there's probably let's say, Michele, you had a Latina woman come up to you and say, I want to be on a board. I'm not sure how. I'm, in business several years. I think I can offer. What advice would you have?
So the advice I would have is several-fold. One, you have to, have the approval or the encouragement of your organization, whoever you are working for. It is very frustrating, I have to say, as a person who is on nom gov committees, who has a really interesting individual come and speak to me and say they would like to be on a board and kind of have a really great background. And then as you get further down the line, you find that they don't have the approval of their organization. And that's like full stop. I mean, you can't go any further with that person. So you have to know whether or not your organization is supportive of you going on an outside board. There are lots of reasons why being on an outside board is of benefit to your home company. But as I mentioned before, it does take a lot. It does take time. It takes a lot of time for you to actually be a good board member on that external firm. So you have to have the approval, because there may come times when you need to put that other company ahead of some work that you may need to do in your day job. Secondly, you need to also be able to have an understanding of how your skill sets fit into corporations. So I encourage people to go online or to talk to executives that they know, or that, as Libby said, if you serve on a nonprofit, you're probably sitting on a nonprofit next to somebody who's a senior executive at another company. So, and that other company might be an opportunity for you to serve on their board. So
that's a great point.
There's people all around you. But whenever you think about that, you also have to think about it from the standpoint of what skills can I bring to that board? And so I encourage people to look online at proxy statements, because in today's world, proxy statements list usually like a skills matrix type of discussion about their board of directors. What skills do their people have? What are the foundational skills and experiences they expect their board to have? And understand what you have and what your experiences are that fit into those types of things, so that you're talking the same language as people on whose board you want to serve. I have skills in finance and accounting. I have skills in strategy. I have skills as a climate expert. So you have to understand your skills. You're not looking for another job. So you're not talking about it in those terms. You're looking for a director governance role. So you have to think about yourself in those terms. The other piece I tell people is that they need to think about it in terms of what they're doing to put themselves out. When I first started, even before I even knew about corporate directorships, I would go and I'd speak on panels about the healthcare industry and the future of the healthcare industry. I would go and I'd talk to people about I was a co-founder of a credit union at Baxter. And I would go out and I would talk to people about, my experience as a business entrepreneur in building a credit union. And I got to meet tons of people in doing that. And so whenever it came time for me to want to be on a board, people knew who I was, they had heard my name. I had gotten some visibility. I had given back. And so I had a different profile, as opposed to a lot of people who in today's world, it's sort of heads down, do your job, and somebody will recognize you. You have to lift yourself up from time to time and give back from that experience. And so those are the things that I sort of counsel people to get in front of the opportunity to get on a corporate board.
Well, that is really prescriptive, and I want to thank you. And now, Libby, what can you add to this?
I just was going to say the being visible is so critical, because that's how you meet people. And I did the same thing, speaking, being quoted in the media, being an expert on certain areas that people were interested in. And every time you're out there speaking, not just speaking, but networking with the people you meet, keeping track of them, all of this helps. You never know what will be the trigger that gets you there, but you have to be out there.
I went on my first board at the tender age of 38. And so there are opportunities for young people who have made accomplishments. And in today's world, young people are doing even more than I had thought about doing when I was at that point in my career. And so there are opportunities, because the experiences people are having are experiences that we as directors on boards, we need to have in our boardrooms.
Yeah, this is great. And so far, there are two messages that I want to point out to everyone. Make sure your company knows and they are approving of you doing this. They understand why. And two, you have to network ferociously and get your expertise out there and look on the proxies. So I'm going to tell you something that reminded me of this, and I know that Libby, you've had deep involvement with Southwest. So the first CEO I ever met, this was 10 years before I was interviewing CEOs on my radio show, was Herb Kelleher. And I was at a black tie event, and you're smiling because he is so iconic. And so I go up to him and I said, what makes a company great? And this is going to tie back into boards.
I know exactly what he said, but go ahead.
Okay. So I said, well, he said, well, it's not how quickly you turn around an airline, and it's not how much the price of fuel is or anything. He said, it's when you see Mary Jo in the elevator and you say, oh, how is Patricia's soccer game? So I said, oh, it's communication. He goes, communication? And then he says, what did he say? It's love, right? He said, it's love. So at that moment, I swear, that Tina Turner song, What's Love Got to Do with It, is bouncing through my brain. So I gave a highly articulate comment like, huh? And then he said something that I think summarizes everything. He said, love, unleashing the spirit of the individual. Mm-hmm. And so how this goes is organizations now have a spirit. And the way to unleash that is unleashing the individual spirit. And you can't do that if you don't have broad representation and you have everyone mixed in and great diversity going.
Well, Southwest discovered that about 40 years earlier than the rest of the world. But I am so glad that the rest of the world is catching up. And I thought you were going to say, Herb said, it's the people and the culture, which really is about love. But what an amazing person to work for. And we miss him. He passed away a couple of years ago.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Without him, that's probably the reason I said one CEO interview, look how much I learned. That's probably why I went into that. So go ahead, Michele.
I think part of the opportunity is for us, and you made a comment earlier about the percentage of women on boards, and you said that women of color are about a third of that. Women of color actually are about 5%.
No, oh, wait, I want to interrupt. That is this month in August, women of color were a third. It's abysmal, the number. If you look big term, all I'm saying is we have hope because we're on a trend, but keep going.
Yeah, because I think what I always have told not only my board members, but it also goes to me deeper into the organization, because organizations they're the feeder system for boards of directors. Right. They are where people get the experiences and the know-how that allows them to be on a corporate board. And so when I think about it, I say to people that we have to be able to not only encourage, but embrace the opportunity for these younger people to take on the leadership roles and have the visibility to be able to move into the boardroom, because we as a nation, as an economy, cannot have half of our population on the sidelines, not providing their input, their knowledge, their wisdom into the information and the ways in which we are building that, again, long-term sustainability of our companies and our economies. Same thing with people of color, both men and women. We cannot afford to have those individuals sitting on the sideline, not putting into our decision-making their lived experiences to make us better.
And Michele, I don't know about you, but on a couple of boards, I've been in conversations on succession planning. And one of the things I find very encouraging is the company themselves saying, we need to get this executive on a board, because if she's going to be a candidate for CEO, she needs to have that board experience.
Exactly.
And so CEOs are reaching out to their fellow CEO friends saying, I have an up-and-comer. She's fantastic. She might be good on your board. And I think that's helping quite a bit too, as we're thinking of moving diverse candidates into the C-suite, into the CEO role. We're also providing future board members.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? I think there's a key word here. which is everyone had talked for years about mentorship, but really it's about sponsorship, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because we only have a few minutes left. Just explain what needs to be done if someone, what sponsorship means when you're on a board, because we may have people here and they see a candidate, they say they would be great.
I am where I am today because of sponsorship. I am here because my CEO, back when I was a up and coming executive within our firm, said that he would move me, quite frankly, from a line F role. I ran corporate strategy into a line role, which was heading up our largest international subsidiary at the time, a fully integrated manufacturing unionized plant. I mean, it was a miniature Baxter International. I would not have had the opportunity to make that leap if it were not for Vernon Laux. And I would not have been able to be on a corporate board if he had not been approving of that. When I went to my first role within this organization, it was Baxter Canada, our Canadian operation. He said I would get board calls, and he actually would sit with me on the phone and talk about, I would say, this company has lobbed a request across my transom. What do you think? And we ended up with him saying, you need to take blah, 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 and all the steps we went through, got me on my first board, which was the old Dayton Hudson and now the Target Corporation, which is world renowned for its focus in the area of governance. And so if I hadn't had that sponsorship and that person looking out for me, I would not be sitting where I am today, or at least not as early in my career as I am today.
What a wonderful story. And I could see why you're viscerally so passionate. Libby, you can give our final words of inspiration.
Okay, well, I would just say, if you're in the situation where you can sponsor someone, it doesn't mean just making a call. It means doing what one of my boss did one time. He called me up to the office, the CEO, and I thought maybe I was in trouble. And he said, you are taking over the United Way campaign. Now, I was at the time maybe 32 years old. And I was like, what? And he said, your job is to call on all the CEOs in the community and get them to open their wallets. And that was very scary. But that's the first step that I made into meeting CEOs, asking people for a request. And I got to know the CEOs, which was a great advantage. So sponsor somebody if you can.
And on that, I want to say, Libby and Michele, what energy you have, what wisdom you have. Wonderful having you on this special panel on the board. And of all the 17 sustainabilities, even though I actually studied environmental studies back, believe it or not, number 5, the gender equity, to me, is the most important thing that is going to move the whole world forward in a really positive way. I want to thank you both, and I want to thank Ideagen and George so much for putting on important meetings like this. Good luck, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.